Good Monday morning, everyone. Welcome to week number 6 in Biology 120. We've had a good week so far. Really enjoyed those discussions on cancer because there were a lot of good discussions. And we'll see how you did on that last milestone, milestone 3. I'll be grading those this week. So last week you learned about the structure of DNA and how it replicates. You learned about a process called mitosis, which is a type of cell division where you get identical daughter cells to the mother cell, and this happens throughout all of biology. I mean, your skin cells are doing this right now as we speak. You also learned about transcription and translation, and those are the processes by which DNA is used to produce proteins. Most of those are enzymes, and enzymes do all the work in cells. So transcription and translation actually are the job of DNA in the production of proteins, because DNA is used to make those enzymes that run all the chemistry in your cells. Okay, this week you're going to learn some about sexual reproduction. Also, you're going to discuss asexual reproduction and some inheritance patterns. You have this going on in the lab too, if you're taking the lab along with the lecture. So the chapters this week, 11 on meiosis. Meiosis is a type of cell division where the chromosome number is decreased. So if you're an organism that does sexual reproduction, you take an egg from one organism and the sperm from another organism, you put those together. Okay, if there was not a reduction in chromosome number, then you would have twice as many chromosomes in this zygote, which is a fertilized egg, than you do in the original organisms, and that is not going to work out. You have to have a reduction in chromosome number, and that happens in meiosis. So you produce either eggs or sperm through meiosis, the process of meiosis. Chapter 12 is all about Mendelian genetics, which is very interesting based on Gregor Mendel's work. He was an Austrian monk. He had a lot of time on his hands. And so he grew pea plants. And the reason that he chose pea plants was because they grew very fast. There were lots of different characteristics between them because farmers grew so many different varieties of peas. So he had easy access. It didn't take much land to grow the pea plants. And he counted thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pea plants and their traits over time, and he discovered some things after he did all this counting. He discovered that there were some traits that were dominant, that would show up all the time, and some that were recessive, that could be hidden in different generations. So he figured out many important things about inheritance without even knowing what a gene is, without knowing what DNA is. I'm sure he never even saw a cell. So he still figured out a lot about genetics through his work with pea plants. Oh, one interesting fact. Do you know why he quit growing pea plants and studying inheritance? Because he went into administration in the monastery, which is interesting. So he gave up his science in order to be an administrator. So anyway, also chapter 47, which is about biodiversity. So read through that. At least skim through your chapters, please. You need this. All right, read the Module 6 overview and watch the 2 videos. One is on meiosis, which will explain that process of how eggs and sperm are produced, and also epigenetics, and you're going to need that for your discussion board postings this week. So this week in the discussion board, remember your initial post is due on Thursday. Your 2 response posts are due on Sunday. Epigenetics. I'm going to cover this more in coming slides, so just hang on to that. But this is based on that video that you needed to watch, and particularly about the mice in the video. So there are 2 mice. There's a big one and a small one, and they're different colors, but they are identical twins. So why in the world do they look different? Because of epigenetics. And I'm going to cover that in just a second, like I said. In your response post, you're going to also talk about the importance of your genes versus the environment in producing the organism that you are. And all organisms are like this. So how much do genes contribute to you as a being, and how much does your environment influence what you're like as a being. All right, then the journal entry for this week is more about reproduction. The first part is about how bacteria reproduce and also how they get new genetic information. So they reproduce asexually. They just basically split in half. It's called binary fission. Binary, 2 parts, fission is to split. They just split in half. Okay, so you get identical daughter cells this way. Well, how in the world could they ever get new traits if all they do is split in half? There are ways that they do this, and those are found in chapter 22, section 2. So you will talk about mutations. That's a way. So that's a change in your DNA by some mutagenic force out there in the world. And in fact, bacteria can even mutate their own DNA. So mutations, conjugation, transduction, and transformation. All these are listed in this chapter, and you're going to talk about those. That's how they get new genetic traits. You're going to compare asexual and sexual reproduction, and you're going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each, because there are, of each. If you're a bacterial cell, you don't have to get all dressed up and look pretty and put on perfume so that you can find a mate, because you just split in half to reproduce. So you're going to be discussing some of those advantages and disadvantages. You're also going to talk about biodiversity and how you get biodiversity because of sexual reproduction, and you're going to phrase this in the forms as related to evolution. So I want to give you a definition of evolution right now. My definition of evolution is a change in the genes in a population over time. Doesn't that make sense? Because the most suited organisms out of all the offspring that are produced are going to survive and pass on their genes. And those that are the least suited for a particular environment will perish or will die, and so they don't pass on their genes into the next generations. So this is a good definition for evolution, and for those of you who say that you don't believe in it, it's pretty hard not to believe in this concept, because only the surviving offspring are going to pass on their genes into the next generations. So that's my definition of evolution, a change in genes in a population over time. You're also going to discuss genetic erosion in agriculture. And genetic erosion is the loss of genes by selecting certain types, varieties, subspecies, whatever you want to call them, to grow. To grow as our food crops, to grow as our livestock. And we are doing this because a lot of farming operations are so huge now, we're not keeping hold of the heirloom varieties and older varieties of cows and pigs and chickens and tomato plants and corn plants. And, the list goes on. So you're going to discuss this issue of genetic erosion in agriculture. And then finally, you're going to work on your slides for your final project. Please, please, please go back and read my comments, my suggestions in the grading that I've done so far on milestones 1 and 2, but milestone 3 will be graded this week also. So make those corrections, make those fixes. Start putting milestone 1 and milestone 2 into slide format, because you're going to make one PowerPoint presentation for this final project. And you will include speaker notes. If you don't know how to make the speaker notes, please let me know. I can show you. I can make a little video, whatever you need for me to do to show you how to do that. Okay, so please don't forget to work on that final project too. Okay, now I want to cover just a few extra things about this week and give you a few more explanations. Let me get over here to the next slide. So genes equal traits. Genes are segments of DNA that code for particular traits, and this usually means enzymes of some type that run some kind of biochemical process that produces a trait in you. So genes equal traits, and sometimes a single gene may be abnormal, defective, may cause problems, may just make you different than everybody else. So here are some genes that I have listed here just on my slide to show you some pictures. The one on the left-hand side is a little boy who has albinism, which you have probably heard of. Albinism is a loss of melanin production. And so you have lighter colored skin, hair, eyes. That's just a trait that some people have. There's nothing wrong with that. The man in the middle has what's called Marfan syndrome, and this is where obviously you can tell what's going on. He is extremely tall and he has very big feet and hands. Some people with Marfan syndrome become basketball players. They usually have a lot of trouble with their backs and with their joints as they get older. Plus, the other problem that you have with Marfan syndrome is that you can get a tear in your aorta, which is the main artery that leads out of your heart that carries oxygenated blood throughout your body. And if you get a tear in that, a lot of the time that's fatal. So that's a man with Marfan syndrome. That is actually a dominant trait. It's rare, but it is a dominant trait. So if you have that trait, then you will express it. And bottom right-hand corner is a picture of some sickled out cells. And so this is sickle cell anemia. You notice that some of the red blood cells are nice and sort of Werther's lozenge shape, Werther's candy shape cells. That's what red blood cells are supposed to look like. But under low oxygen conditions, if you have sickle cell anemia, your cells can sickle out, and you can see some pictures of those right there, and they get stuck in your capillaries. So that means that they cannot transfer oxygen to the cells out in the tissues, and this can lead to lots of tissue damage over time, and it is extremely painful, and from what I understand, and is harmful to your tissues. And that is a trait in one single gene. All right, so genes equal traits. Epigenetics, I want to mention this. So if you think about your genes in this way, in almost all the cells in your body, you have the same DNA. You have all the DNA in a skin cell, that you have in a heart muscle cell, that you have in a nerve cell, that you have in a brain cell, that you have in a liver cell. The DNA is the same. So then how do you end up with all these different tissues in your body? Epigenetics. You have all the same DNA, but which parts of the DNA get turned on and get turned off will determine what that cell becomes. This is epigenetics. Epi means above the genes. And what's so important about this is epigenetics turns on and off genes. This is a modification of gene expression. So gene expression means which genes are turned on and off. This doesn't refer to the genes themselves. You have a certain number of genes and types of genes that are there. But which ones get turned on and which ones get turned off? And I have always said, I've said this for decades, that of course it's very important for us to learn what genes are present in all different types of organisms, including human beings. But it will be even more important to figure out how to turn on and off all of these genes so that we can control things. Can you imagine what we could do with this information once we get it? We can turn off cancer cells. Wouldn't that be amazing? Oh, you have developed a type of cancer. Well, let's just fiddle with the epigenetics of these cancer cells and we will turn them off and they'll die and they'll go through apoptosis and that'll be the end of them. So epigenetics is a very exciting field in genetics right now. We're discovering more and more about how genes are turned on and off. You're also going to talk about the nature versus nurture argument, and this has been going on through the ages, and sometimes we sway one way and sometimes we sway the other, but it really, both of these determine who you are as an organism. Nature means your genetics. So do your genes determine the type of person that you are, the traits that you have? And of course, you're going to say yes, but also on the other hand, how much does the environment play a role in who you are? And this is the nurture aspect. How much does your environment play in the production of you as an individual? How much does your home life affect you? How much does the trauma that you have experienced? How much do your experiences influence who you are? How much does the pollution that you're exposed to affect you as an organism? So this is the nature versus nurture argument, which has been around a long time and which has led to a lot of problems through human history. If you'll think about ethnic cleansing that has happened in cultures all around the world, this is part of this. It's the nature argument that your genes determine who you are. So if we can wipe out your particular genes in the population, then the whole human population will be better. The whole eugenics movement, which was swept across the whole globe. So don't just think Nazis, because Nazis were in on this. But we had a whole movement in the United States of eugenics. And what this was a movement to improve human genetics. Well, how are you going to do that? Encourage the best people to procreate. Who decides that, by the way? And to take away the ability to procreate from the less desirable individuals in the population. So this was really important for decades, even in this country. We had sterilization of individuals who were alcoholics, who had lower IQs, who were promiscuous, who had tried to commit suicide. We had involuntary sterilization. And if you don't believe this, go do some research. We are still making reparations in different states because of this particular practice. So yes, they could sterilize you without your consent for decades in this country. This is not in some foreign country where a dictator was ruling the country. This was even in this country. I'm going to share with you a video of some identical twins who were separated at birth. They're very interesting to watch because they have such similar characteristics when you look at them and when you watch them speak. That is very interesting, but they were not raised together. Also, I'm going to suggest a movie for you. I've just seen it again this weekend. It's so good. I don't know how many times I've seen it, but it's called The Bad Seed. Make sure you get the 1956 version. I'll also put the link in the announcement so that you can go to the trailers to see if you want to watch this. But it's all about this question of nature versus nurture. This was in the 1950s, 1956. Woohoo! Good year I was born. But it's all about this question of nature versus nurture in people. And it's interesting to look at our understanding of this back then. The importance of sexual reproduction. This is not on your slide because my camera's not picking this up. But this is the Duggar family, which I know everybody's heard of, 19 and Counting or whatever the show is now. So the couple in the middle there had 19 children. I think they are finished at 19. And now their children are producing children. And the purpose of this slide is to show you the importance of sexual reproduction. Every human being, whether you're male or female, will produce up to 8 million different types of eggs or sperm through the process of meiosis. And that means when an egg and a sperm come together in a human being, you have 8 million times 8 million different combinations of genes from those two parents to produce children. And so you get a variety of offspring. And I'm just showing you here with this family that If you look at all the kids, they are different from each other, even with the same two parents. Even though you got 19 different kids, they're all different from each other. And that's because of how many different combinations you can make with the eggs and sperm just from these same two people. That's the importance of sexual reproduction. You can make lots and lots of different types of offspring. And we're not talking about just their looks. You're also talking about their biochemistry, how different you are on the inside and how your cells work. My sister and I have a lot of characteristics that we have in common. We both enjoy photography and nature and that sort of thing. But we have a big difference. Cilantro. Yeah, cilantro. I love cilantro. It's awesome. It's salsa and Mexican food. She says the cilantro tastes like soap. All right? That's a difference in our biochemistry. Because when she tastes cilantro, it tastes like soap. When I taste it, it tastes nice and fresh and green and a welcome addition to any kind of food. So, see, there's a difference in our biochemistry. And that is true for any offspring that are produced. There are differences in us, and the hope is with organisms that sexually reproduce that some offspring will have traits that will allow them to survive in whatever environmental condition comes along. So that's the importance of sexual reproduction. And finally, biodiversity. Here's a cool picture over here of biodiversity in ecosystems. This is terribly important in ecosystems because you've got to have lots of different organisms fill in all different types of niches in order to have a healthy ecosystem. But we also have to have biodiversity in our genes. An example of this, where this is not the case, is in the cheetah population around the world. They have such low biodiversity in their genes that they probably will become extinct no matter what we do with that population, because there's just not enough variety in the genes for them to be able to survive if a disease comes through or if a terrible environmental condition comes through, whatever. So you've got to have biodiversity all the way from the genes up into ecosystems. That's an important topic, and we're going to keep covering it during this term. I know we only have a couple of weeks left, but we still will be covering it. All right, so that is it. I know I covered a lot for this week, but hopefully I helped you. And I hope you have a wonderful week this week. And let me know if you need anything. Here's my email address, m.sigmon@snhu.edu. Just give me a shout, and I'll answer any questions that you have, including any in the lab if you have any with those, because I've taught the lab also. All right, have a great week.